So, according to this special report on 247wallstreet.com, Kentucky is the ninth worst state for the old people to live. So, for older people 65 and older, median household income is $33,000 a year, which is the fifth lowest in the country. Percentage with a disability that's 65 and over is 42%. So there's lots of disabled people here. Percentage with a bachelor's degree or higher, 16.7%. It's the second lowest. Not very many college educated old people here. Lots of them are disabled. They're making $33,000 a year. And violent crime rate is 198.8 per 100,000 residents, which is the fifth lowest. So none of those indicators are good. They're fifth lowest, second lowest. Less than 17% of Kentucky's elderly population had at least a bachelor's degree as of 2013. The second worst rate nationwide. Perhaps as a result, older Kentuckians have relatively poor income security. Other households have a median income of less than $33,000 in 2013, one of the lowest figures in the country. The vast majority of seniors received Social Security benefits. In addition, 48.5% of older residents had other forms of retirement income, larger than the comparable national figure of 47.9%. However, these supplemental incomes were not enough to keep 11.2% of Kentucky's elderly population out of poverty, one of the highest poverty rates among the state elderly populations. So we're the ninth worst, right? So it's a bit frustrating when you read something like this and you know that both Rand Paul is talking about cutting Social Security. Mitch McConnell wants to privatize Social Security. Jack Conway is in favor of raising the retirement age or cutting Social Security. So, I mean, there's no options. In Kentucky, you either have, a Republican laissez-faire casino-style capitalist conservative, or you either have a laissez-faire casino-style dog-eat-dog capitalism conservative on the other side. So, I mean, you don't have a choice. You have the exact, there's no alternatives. And when you hear about Kentuckians voting for, these folks who are going to cut their Social Security, they are voting against their self-interest. These are the chickens voting for Colonel Sanders. They are voting against their self-interest, their self-economic interest. And it's all about the economics. It's all about the money. We increase our freedom when we have education and healthcare and good roads and good infrastructure. We increase our freedom. Denmark is the happiest country in the world. Finland, Sweden, all these countries get such high indicators nationally or internationally based on happiness and democracy and overall well-being and how to live well. So I mean, there's we should do what the other countries are doing that are doing things well. I probably should actually take a look at the states that are doing really well in the United States to see which ones are to achieve up to. We're not the worst though, so it's not all gloom and doom. Alabama is worse, so feel better about yourself. Kentucky, Alabama is crappier. West Virginia is crappier for old folks. So, I mean, if you're like, I live in Kentucky, what am I supposed to do? Well, don't move to Arkansas or West Virginia or Alabama. That's, or Louisiana or Mississippi. Big surprise, right? Mississippi, always the worst in every indication. I used to say thank God for West Virginia because they always seem to be lower in the statistics when it came to different sort of surveys, but the Mississippi's always the worst one. Mississippi is, they still have the rebel flag on their flag, so Mississippi is like backwards. So Kentucky's not Mississippi, but we got to work on this. We need to have a nice Garden of Eden, a nice paradise for everybody. Good jobs, good economy, lots of hustle and bustle. I heard actually in terms of Europe, we are Greece. We get $1.50 more on the dollar that we send to the federal government. So whereas Greece is getting more than their fair share because they're poor, so does Kentucky. But we've been doing it the whole time because, United States. So we've been together the whole time. And it's like controversial to do it in Greece. Greece has actually voted for a guy that was campaigning against the vicious austerity measures. And so I got to pay attention to Greece a little bit more. So this is a Bays, is Ralph Bays. This man here, he was Jack Conway said we need to put this guy to death. We need to kill this man. This is a 2008 article by USA Today, and he's like, I'm through with apologizing. I'm done with the apologies. So what happened is we know that he killed 2 police officers. What we don't know happened is exactly what happened, right? There's 2 conflicting accounts. You got, one account, and you got another account. So here's what happened that day. Here was his explanation. It seems like that's what they interviewed him in jail. So this is Ralph Bays' perspective. Arthur Briscoe went to Bays' house on a ridge off Little Hardwick Creek Road on January 30th, 1992 to serve 4 warrants from Toledo, Ohio, according to the 1992 news accounts. The warrants stemmed from charges that included retaining stolen property and felony assault. Bays acknowledges being agitated by Briscoe's visit, knowing that his wife's adult children, with whom he was feuding, had told the local authorities about the Ohio warrants. Ralph Bays admitted he was armed with a semi-automatic rifle and pointed at Briscoe as he came onto his property. After that initial confrontation, Ralph Bays said he turned toward the cabin to leave, and his wife saw Briscoe start to reach for his gun. During the 1992 interview, Bays' wife, Becky, who has since died, told the Courier-Journal that she grabbed the deputy's arm and yelled for her husband to run. He did, and Briscoe got into his cruiser and went down a hill to call for backup. That's when Bennett, who also was Briscoe's brother-in-law, responded. Accounts differ on what happened next. Bays said the lawman returned to the ridge and began shooting after seeing him walk out from behind a brush pile to surrender. He claimed he was shot in the leg by their first shot and was forced to fire his own weapon. I grabbed my rifle and we go to war, Ralph Bays said. These 2 men are trying to kill me. But Deputy Robert Matthews, who was then a Staten police officer among the first on the scene, said Bennett tried to talk to Ralph Bays into putting down his weapon, but Ralph Bays started shooting. Bennett was shot in the back as he tried to seek cover in the back seat of his police cruiser, Matthews said. Ralph Bays doesn't dispute that. Only thing I know is these guys are shooting at me, Ralph Bays says. I know the second he got rearranged, he was going to try to kill me again. So I did not hesitate to shoot him. Briscoe had moved behind the front of the cruiser trying to shoot at Bays from a covered position. Every time he put his head above the car, I tried to put a bullet between his eyes, Ralph Bays says. And when he reached the front of the cruiser, Briscoe turned to run while at the same time turning back to shoot. I shot him in the back, Ralph Bays said. At that moment, it was the only shot I had at him. As Briscoe lay on the ground, Bays said he walked up and shot him in the back of the head. Then he grabbed both officers' weapons and ran. Into the night, officers from surrounding counties scoured the area for Ralph Bays and set up roadblocks. Ralph Bays had headed for the woods going over a mountain before eventually knocking on a door in neighboring Estill County. He had no idea it was the home of a former sheriff. He turned himself in peacefully. By the end of 1993, Ralph Bays was sent to trial in Rowan County because of his pre-trial publicity in Powell. After a week-long case, jurors spent 21 hours weighing evidence before convicting him. They spent another 18 hours considering Ralph Bays' punishment, eventually recommending death. So he spent most of his adult life working as a mechanic, doing odd jobs. He'd been raised in Toledo, Ohio, but spent some time as a boy living in Bath County, Kentucky. Served in the Army for a few years in the 1970s, according to the Courier-Journal archives. After divorcing a woman he met and married in Ohio, returned to Kentucky in the mid-1980s. So, okay, so that's what he's saying. He's saying self-defense, you know. He's saying that He has these in-laws who's sitting there. Supposedly there's warrants. That's what the newspaper report. But the dissent in one of the cases, one of the Supreme Court judges had dissented, and they had said that the feud was a big deal. He was feuding with his wife's adult children, and they were making stuff up. And this wasn't the first time that he had been harassed based upon supposedly there was warrants. But also, in the dissent, they said that there was no warrants. So he had no warrants for his arrest. The adult children told the police officers that he had a warrant. They checked to see if there was a warrant. There wasn't any warrant, but they still went to go, to his house anyways. So there wasn't even a warrant. They didn't even have a warrant. And there was a feud. And so they had accused Ralph Bays of doing stuff before. And so he had every reason in his mind to think that they were going to do some harm to him. And so he says that when he thought they was going to do some harm, he defended himself. And so, at the very least, we don't know what's happened. At the very most, he's innocent. And this is the guy that Jack Conway said we should put to death. So it's Ralph Bays. He's currently on death row in Eddyville, Kentucky, on the castle on the Cumberland. Now I got to talk about Japan's death trap. Now, Japan had actually a 300% deficit to their GDP, relative to their GDP. So I don't know, I forget what their GDP was, but it was, it's 3-1. It was 300%. Now it's 240%. Some of them only say 134%. So it's essentially Japan's debt is like an issue that people don't talk about, but Japan hasn't sunk. They've been in debt for quite some time, and they haven't sunk. So they've been able to, and actually this other article that I'm going to pull up, I'm going to read this one because this is the opposing viewpoint. But the other article that I had pulled up says that they're not sitting there telling them that they need to raise taxes, that they need to work on the debt. They don't need to focus. I mean, they're already spending 15% of all the taxes on the debt. So their budget is balanced. And so what economists are actually recommending for Japan to do is to increase their growth, increase their GDP. And so by increasing the GDP, increasing the growth and doing better, having a better economy, that actually with Japan, that's what they need to do. They don't need to raise taxes. They don't need to cut services. It's okay that they're in debt and that they have a deficit. And it's actually kind of like all countries run some type of deficit. I think Gaddafi actually was debt free. But besides, there's a few, and that's good. That's where you want to get to, right? Eventually for your state. You want the state governments to be debt free. But it's not, there's nothing wrong with running a deficit. So if you needed to borrow some money in order to, build some schools or build some hospitals, you should be able to do that with no problem. So Japan's debt trap. Japan's government has a lot of debt, not as much as people think. So, it's 240%. 15.6% of Japanese tax revenue goes to pay the interest on this debt every year. About the same as for the U.S. This is a moderate burden on government finances, but one that would quickly become unsustainable if interest rates were to spike. So if interest rates all of a sudden start going up, then they're saying, Bloomberg View is saying that this would be a problem for Japan. How do governments deal with the rising debt to GDP ratio? There are three basic ways: consolidate, monetize, or default. That's it. According to Bloomberg View, there's only three options: consolidate, monetize, or default. Declare bankruptcy. You can't pay for it. Oh, well, who cares? Go on. That's what the United States did during the American Revolution. There's a big debt with France, and we said, no, we're not going to pay a debt. Nah, we're not going to pay any of that. And so they defaulted. Figuring out which of these Japan will do is the key of predicting the nation's economic future. When I talk to Japanese government officials, academics, and business leaders, they all seem to be in agreement. Japan's government will do whatever is necessary in order to fiscally consolidate and reduce its annual budget deficit. Since spending on wasteful infrastructure projects and the like has already been slashed, most spending increases are due to population aging, which is more severe in Japan than any other country on the planet. This means that fiscal consolidation would have to come in the form of tax increases. How much would Japan have to raise taxes to stabilize its debt-to-GDP ratio? The numbers are daunting. A 2013 paper by economists Gary Hansen and Salahattin M. Rooglu found that in order to put the debt on a sustainable path, Japan would have to increase tax revenue to 40% to 60% of GDP. That would be unprecedented. Currently, the most taxed countries are Denmark and Sweden, which collect 44.7% and 44.3% of their GDP, respectively, in taxes. Fiscal consolidation would put Japan at or above this level. So he's saying they have to increase their tax if they want to, I guess, zero out. A 2011 paper by economists Takia Hoshi and Takeru Doi was a little more optimistic, putting the needed revenue at 40% to 47% of the GDP. But much has happened since that paper was written to make the outlook more grim, so higher estimates may be the better ones. Could Japan cut spending? In the 1990s and early 2000s, huge amounts were lavished on white elephant construction projects to keep up employment. But in the mid-2000s, most of this spending was cut. Nowadays, Japan's huge government outlays are almost entirely a function of its aging population. Old people vote, and Japan has a very high and growing percentage of old people, so cutting retirement and medical benefits is probably a political non-starter. That leaves taxes. Taxes now take about 28% of Japan's GDP, so if Japan raised the consumption tax by 12 to 32 percentage points, it could whip the debt, but this may be politically impossible because of the economic pain involved. When Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, recently succeeded in raising the tax from 5% to 8%, Japan's economy experienced a severe contraction. This echoes a similar experience in 1997. Why exactly Japan's economy is so vulnerable to tax increases isn't clear. After all, the U.S. recently carried out a similar tax hike with far less pain. I've never known the sales tax to be 37%. He's saying that, well, since you can't cut the social spending, then you got to raise the taxes. But there's another choice, right? There's another option. Default. So either raise taxes, cut spending, or default. That seems to be Bloomberg's view, that's more Chicken Little than what this Quartz article here says. So Japan has we have $16 trillion in debt. Japan's debt load has passed a numerical numbing level of, I don't know if that's a yen or what it is, but something quadrillion. That's 15 zeros. It's about 10.5 trillion. Japan is one of the strongest economies in the world. Germany is one of the strongest economies in the world. And the United States is, but I think that's not a fair comparison because it's 50 nations. United States, 50 states in one. And so you'd have to actually compare the European Union, which is doing better than the United States. And so the top economies is China. We're the number one, U.S., so we're beating China. We're beating all the countries, but China, Japan, Germany are, in the top 5 or 6 or so, or maybe top 4. And I think that's remarkable because if you look at the size of Germany and you look at the size of Japan, they're way smaller than the entire United States. And I don't even compare it to Texas. I mean, I don't know how big Germany, I think, might be bigger than Texas, but maybe by like in Arkansas or by West Virginia or something. So it's only like 2 or 3 states. Regardless, we got way more states. We got way more natural resources and land and area. And so it would seem like, that would be to our advantage. Russia has a lot of those advantages. And so they haven't been able to turn, their tundra. And we're kind of in a good climate zone. We got all 4 seasons here. It's not like Alaska where you get summer for half the time and then you get winter for half the time. So, let's see. Or that's light and darkness, isn't it? It's cold always up there. Is there summertime in Alaska? I don't know. But eye-catching to be sure. But it's a lot of money. $10.5 trillion in debt. So, yes, while Japan does have a ton of debt, the outright level is not the best way to keep track of it. The more important gauge is debt as a percentage of the country's annual economic output, or GDP. Not more than 200%, Japan's debt load is the highest among all developed nations. So they're the ones, that's why, I mean, there's a lot of focus on Japan because they got the biggest debt in the world. So shouldn't Japan immediately set about raising taxes, cutting spending to try to get that debt under control? No, it shouldn't. The goal of the economic policymakers should be to reduce the debt as a share of GDP. That's because debt to GDP gives you a quick snapshot of how easy or difficult it is for a nation to carry its debt load and pay its bills, which is what markets care about the most. And history has shown us that the best way to reduce a nation's debt to GDP ratio is to focus on boosting GDP rather than cutting debt. So they need to boost their GDP by concentrating on enlarging the denominator. You get a smaller number for debt to GDP. Raise your GDP, and then your debt to GDP ratio doesn't look as bad. Your debt seems minor. And so even though they have, the highest debt in the world, economists are saying just work on growth. Work on growing your economy. History has shown us that the best way to reduce a nation's debt to GDP ratio is to focus on boosting GDP rather than cutting debt. By concentrating on enlarging the denominator, you get a smaller number for the debt to GDP. You also get a favorable decline in the numerator as well, thanks to improved tax receipts and declining spending on things like unemployment benefits. You don't believe us? Just listen to the folks who are paid to monitor Japan's debt load. Moody's analyst recently published a note on Japan's sovereign debt entitled Higher Growth, Essential to Reduce Japan's Large Government Debt Burden. Moody is like the thing that they say whether or not a nation's economy is good or bad, right? They give these ratings out. And that's what the big debt ceiling argument was. They was not going to raise the debt ceiling, and that was going to put the United States in default. The Republicans were not going to raise the debt ceiling, and so the U.S. was going to go into default. And once we go into default, the American dollar, I mean, we're a failing empire. If we fail, the American dollar is going to go to the very bottom of the pile. It's a house of cards. We benefit because the world has been trading with the American dollar. Russia and China no longer do that. And petrodollars, oil, is still being traded in dollars, and that helps the United States because they use our currency as the basis for the currency in the world. And so that helps us because it increases the value of our dollar. Everybody's using our dollar. It's all over the place. So because of our monetary policy, the United States achieves more wealth that way. So by, messing with our credit rating, that's not good news. By messing with the credit rating, the dollar could collapse, right? That's the worst case scenario. And with a worse rating, it's harder to get loans and any type of help if you needed some help to get a loan. So you got to have a good credit rating. And so what they're saying, Moody's, I think it's Moody and Poor's or something, but ending deflation and achieving stronger nominal GDP growth would also help reduce the government's large gross financing requirements and relieve the burden on fiscal austerity, helping in turn to free up savings for more productive private sector investment. A revived economy and smaller fiscal deficit would stabilize and eventually reverse the current upward trajectory in debt through simultaneous improvements in the numerator and denominator of the country's debt to GDP ratio. But still, how will Japan ever manage to pay off its debt? Well, actually it won't. And that's not how developed economies work. Even the most fiscally upright nations such as Germany have trillions in debt. At the end of 2012, Deutschland has about 2.9 trillion in central government debt, or more than 80% of GDP. The goal for countries isn't paying off debt, it's getting its debt to GDP ratio in better shape. You're not going to get to zero. And it's actually good economics. You need to borrow money to get this and that, then you can do that. You don't want it to sink you. You probably should eventually pay off the debt. The government having debt doesn't bother me. It does not bother me. The deficit, I'm not saying that I don't care about it, but I am saying that because Japan has been able to sustain its economy and, at least for quartz. They're not worried about it. And Moody's isn't worried about, right, the standard, the credit rating people. So if the credit rating people isn't worried about it, a lot of these economists isn't worried about it. It almost seems like it's Chicken Little. Everybody's, crying out, oh my God, look at this debt. We're all going to fail. We're all going to die. We're all going down. But that's premature, and you don't know economics. You don't understand the world. You don't understand how nations work. So people are going to have debt. Debt's going to be there. The point is to grow your economy. The point is to increase your GDP. So to get people making more stuff. Individuals, factories, make more stuff. Grow your economy. Start new businesses. Start new small businesses. Start entrepreneurships. The hustle and bustle. And, I do think, I guess I believe in the GDP thing. I think we need to make sure the distribution is right, but increase the GDP and now all the other indicators goes up too. So it's not that I'm not worried about it. I just like the pension crisis. We got this big pension crisis in Kentucky right now. So what do we do about the pension crisis? It's like, oh no, we don't know what to do. There's like, you're supposed to put like $3 billion into it, $3 billion into the pensions, but they haven't been putting the required money that they need to be put into the pensions for like decades. And so it's this corruption that's just been going on forever. Chris Tobey actually wrote this book called Kentucky Fried Pensions, and he's been a whistleblower. He's been pointing out this is what Kentucky's pensions is doing. And so there it is with Colonel Sanders with his angry face, Kentucky Fried Pensions. And it even points out sort of Detroit and Chicago. They defaulted, right? They defaulted. So you can sink yourself. Look at Detroit. So I'm not saying that Japan can't sink itself, but absent spiking interest rates and their economy just collapsing for no reason, Japan's going to be okay. And so, Kentucky, I've heard two different numbers. Wikipedia said $86 billion is what we're in debt. So we're in debt, $86 billion. That's a good chunk. And we haven't been paying these pensions. And so I'm not sure who's been balancing the budgets or what they've been doing. Because if you're $86 billion in debt, what would $3 billion in debt? That's three more, and that's, you don't want to keep on getting in more debt. But if you compare the Japan's GDP to debt ratio to Kentucky's, we actually have higher GDP than debt. So $86 billion, if that's the rate, which would be twice as much as the $44 billion that I've also seen reported. But regardless, we'll take the higher one, okay? So let's assume there's $86 billion in debt, and then we, as a nation, as Kentucky, as a whole, the whole state, we produce $171 billion in GDP. $171 billion. And I've actually heard 186 billion, but I don't know if that was a new figure or where I got the number from, but I've seen 171, and we've been increasing. Our growth has been getting better. Not that much better. They said that we rose 0.9%, but we did grow. We didn't shrink. 0.9% isn't anything to invest in. You're not going to get a bunch of, stockholders and people, Wall Street, I don't know, they want to have 10% returns, 0.9%. But I think it's a positive track. That means the recession is over. We're not going in negative numbers. We're going in positive numbers, but we're just going at a snail's pace. We're going as slow as a turtle. But that's okay, because that means we're improving. And as long as there's progress, right? That's how, if I was a teacher at a school, and say, I'm in 8th grade, I'm an 8th grade teacher, and there's a bunch of students that don't even know how to read. If they could be reading by the end of my class, then there's progress. And so as long as there's progress, as long as there's growth, that's all that matters. That's all that matters. And so if you take the numbers, let's take 171 billion, okay? Because I know that to be 100% true. While I saw one report say 186, 171 billion. So that would be our GDP is way higher than the debt. So 171 over 80, or it would be 86 over 171. And so that's actually less than 50%. So whereas Japan has to worry about a 240% GDP to debt ratio, or a debt to GDP ratio, because debt's the one that's on top. Kentucky has to worry about less than 50%. So what that means is, theoretically, I mean, we have no problem. $3 billion is a drop in the ocean. Of course, we could fund those pensions with no problem. Just borrow the money, pay for the pensions. But the 240%, you have 240%, which is what Japan was doing. So if you were to take Kentucky and, let's just multiply it by 200%, okay? So take the GDP and multiply it by 2. Then you have 4 carry the 1. You get $342 billion. So can we take $3 billion of that $342 billion maximum potential that we could borrow and just take $3 billion of that to pay for the pensions? Of course we can. Oh my God, why would we not do that? Right? You have all these employees, the state employees that have been working on, for the government forever, teachers and, firefighters, police, state workers, a bunch of people who have been fighting, have been working on the front lines of as working class people on the class war. And they probably paid into these pensions, but the government hasn't been financing the pensions to solubility levels. They call it, there's a term that they call it to where it's like acceptable. Annuities, I don't know. But the $342 billion is what Kentucky can borrow without sinking herself. And we would actually still be doing better with our debt to GDP ratio than Japan. And with $342 billion, we could actually, pay the pension over 300, over 300 times. We could pay that pension crisis 300 times the amount. Oh, you want $3 billion? How about if we just give you $342 billion? Will that cover it? Will that help you out? Of course it would. Now, I'm not saying, so I wouldn't say to borrow $342 billion just to be borrowing it, but we could do that. And if Kentucky was to borrow $342 billion, what could we do for the state? Internet's free, right? $342 billion, free internet, lots of hospitals, lots of schools and roads and bridges and things that people need. Medicaid would be paid for, health insurance would be fine, so you'll be taken care of. $342 billion would make Kentucky popping. It would make Kentucky just incredible, just amazing. $342 billion. Now, I'm not saying just to borrow all that, but hypothetically, if we did, what could we do with it? We could definitely pay off the pensions, no problem. Pensions paid off every year, right? $3 billion, you can pay pensions off for 100 years, for borrowing the money. So the pensions, there's no problem. So you don't want to borrow, $342 billion, but borrow your $3 billion. Borrow your $3 billion and pay for your pensions, Kentucky. Why would you not do that? You're going to cut education just so you can pay for the older people that was teaching education. They're not giving anything back. They're not actually creating any GDP. So if we were to do a Republican type economy, a laissez-faire, anarchist economy, and just said balls to the wall, you make your money, you succeed, you sink, fuck you. Laissez-faire capitalism. Some sink, some swim. Only the strong survive, the weak will go down. If we were to do something like that, if we were to have just, sort of just anarchy, you think we would get educated? You think we'd have schools? We wouldn't have any of this stuff. To pay for the pensions, they would just default on it. And so therefore, if you're not making GDP, if you're not increasing or providing any type of, wealth or important good or service to the public, then you're going to fail. You're not going to succeed. So that would save the state some money, but it would kill Kentucky's freedoms. Kentuckians would not be free. We wouldn't be able to go to school to get educated. And while I have my problems with universal public education, I have a problem with Kentucky education, but I don't have a problem with universal public education. That's why I believe in charter schools. That's why I believe in vouchers. Of course there should be choice. And of course there should be competition. You can't just say this is the Kentucky schools and they're going to be best, forever. It's backwards almost. It's almost like with the gas stations. I think Kentucky could buy one gas station. They can't make a monopoly. But if they had a gas station, then there would be other gas stations out there that they would be competing with. Same thing with the public option. Kentucky should sell health insurance. Of course they should. Of course they should have Medicaid. That should be Kentucky's budget. And so Medicaid is, one of the major expenses for Kentucky's budget, but it's it's sort of a weird Ponzi scheme. I think we should have a government, a public option. You should actually just buy Kentucky health insurance. It should be Kentucky health insurance. And it is kind of like that, but not really. I mean, it's a bunch of accounting tricks and, backflips, accounting backflips. So the thing I did have an idea that I kind of lost actually there, but about it being anarchy. So if we did have laissez-faire, pure casino-style capitalism for Kentucky, the government did nothing for anybody, then we would have, they will sell all the assets that Kentucky has. They will keep the court system so that way the corporations can barter and negotiate how they're going to sell, Kentucky's natural resources and our land, our central location, how they're going to use the human pigs, as human capital, as wage slaves to force them into some industry that they don't want to do. Basically dehumanize them, make them an object. And you're not creating good jobs, creative jobs that people can get wealthy and do well with. You're just, you're not doing that. So anarchy. The pensions things wouldn't be paid off. But I think when you just sort of, it reminds me of the Godfather movie when they just sort of, okay, you'll take this part of Cuba, you take this part of Cuba. They just cut it up like an ice cream cake, right? They just like, you take that half, I take this half. That's what the corporations are going to do when they come in here. I'm not against corporations, but I'm also not against unions. I think that unions are the only leverage working people have. If you don't have unions, you're just kissing your boss's butt, all right? And so you have to just do whatever they say unless they come up with some trumped up charges. Sometimes unions can get greedy, but that's their right. They have a risk when they go on strike, and if the employer just fires them all and gets scabs, that's their right too. So there is an inherent risk. If you're unskilled labor, you probably shouldn't strike. You might be able to get a small concession, like one night everybody just says we ain't working unless we all get $1 raise. All right, everybody gets $1 raise. And that would be good for solidarity and morale, and they would deserve $1 raise. But if they said, well, I think I could hire some new people and train all them and fire you guys, then that's their right to do that. So it's a risk. Being in a union and striking isn't guaranteed of anything. And so there's a Catlettsburg. You got the United Steelworkers strike that's actually going on in Catlettsburg in Boyd County. And actually I heard about the Corvette. The Corvette plant is striking, and they were talking about how they make $40 an hour. Well, they make $40 an hour there. So with the GDP, I still want to say something about laissez-faire, casino-style capitalism. What that would be is every man and woman and child for themselves. Everybody's out here just for themselves. And so, you get your job, you got your economy, you doing well, that's okay. Fuck everybody else, right? So you succeed, the strong succeed, and then you just kind of let anybody who's not producing anything, you're old, you're weak, you're disabled, all the people that just isn't helping our economy and creating and making things and moving it forward, you just get rid of them. You just let them die off. And once they die off, you sunk. Sorry, that's casino-style capitalism. You should have invested more wisely, when you was younger. This being the worst place to live for old people, at least they have Social Security. At least they got Social Security. Jack Conway's talking about cutting Social Security. So is Mitch McConnell. So is Rand Paul. And it's not that I'm against austerity measures. I'm just against cutting essential services. So if there are people gaming the system, 50%, that's ridiculous. Disability and Social Security is hard to get onto. You have to go through a long process. You really got to prove your case that you're disabled. So I don't think there's as many people gaming. He said 50%, Rand Paul did. No, I don't think it's that bad. But just like the military and just like education, these are the sacred cows of Kentucky's and the United States. That's what they spend most of their money on their budget. And so that being the case, if there is, some waste and there's bloated bureaucracy, cut it. I'm not against that. I am against cutting, essential services when people need it. So it's just crazy for me because Republicans have been wanting to privatize Social Security for quite some time now. And if they got their way, all these old people who vote Republican because they're racist, bigoted, stupid dumbasses. They're easily fooled by the advertisements. The Democratic Party doesn't stand up for any issues for anybody to actually, to vote for. Then that's the chickens voting for Colonel Sanders. Kentucky Fried Pensions, Kentucky Fried people, Kentucky Fried old people. They're like, well, I'm gonna vote for the guy who's gonna cut my income. There's only three. You only make it 33,000. Actually, is an incredible amount. 33,000. I've been like, just scraping by on just 15,000 for the last 18 years or so, and so 33,000. That's okay. That's all right. I don't think that's the fifth worst in the United States, but that's not bad. You can live on 33,000 a year. But if you keep on voting for these assholes that want to cut your fucking Social Security off, Rand Paul's talking about how Chris Christie took that money for the hurricane money, Hurricane Sandy, and then pointed out that Kentucky is actually a receiver state. So they actually take more money, than their fair share. Kentucky gives $1 to the federal government, and we get $1.50 back. So we're Greece. We get more than our fair share. That's actually a good business investment, right? Send $1 to Washington, and then they give us $1.50. My God, we should give them all of our money and then get $1.50, 150% back on whatever money we give them. Yes, tax everybody 100%, and then give us all that money back, and then have an honest man be governor, and then have that honest man cut us all a check. If we're doing laissez-faire style capitalism, right? That's capitalistic. That's smart business. That's good business. And it's good business if you're an old person who's on Social Security. That's good business. It's good business to supplement your income. It's good business to get like some sort of part-time job or something. I don't know how Social Security works, but it increases your freedom. Denmark is the happiest country in the world because they don't have to worry about anything. They got childcare. They got, if you want to go work and you're a woman, they got babysitters. They have free education, free schools, free trade, free, you build up your skills. You want your education to be, your population to be educated. Of course you do. I mean, my God, if you don't get your population educated, it's just going to fall down. It's just going to sink and it's going to go nowhere. And that's going to be, extraordinarily sad and rough and no good. And so, I don't want casino-style laissez-faire capitalism, but I think that's actually more fair of what I've been looking at the whole time. There's so many government workers out there. I don't know them. I was actually wanting to go through the departments of Kentucky. What are the departments of Kentucky? The governor. The governor controls a lot of departments. How many of those departments have ever been a part of my life? Not very many. These departments have not been in my life. So almost, we need to be educated on what our government does, what services are out there, and we should supplement our lives. If, we all should get jobs, we all should go work, we should be of some value to society. Start a business, sell something, make some money somehow, right? You have to make money. And in order to be an American, you got to make money. Money, money, money. It's all about the money. Show me the money. And so, when you just want to make money all the time, that's casino style capitalism. I mean, you have to do something. But my point is, you increase your freedom when you actually have other, when your education is free. So the money that I make, it won't be going out to education. It won't be going out to healthcare. It won't be going out to childcare. The money that I make will be going out to movies, right? And four-wheelers and, recreation and leisure activities. So the money that I make would just go, I wouldn't have to worry about any of these other, $100,000 in debt. If you would have asked me 10 years ago if I'd rather have $100,000 in education or $100,000, show me the money. Give me the money. I'm tired of y'all just giving us they give the money directly to the universities. They don't give the money directly to the individual. If I had $100,000, I would have had a house. I could have invested in a couple businesses, experimented, tried, failed, moved on. I would have had a better education. I would have got a better education if you would have given me $100,000 instead of giving me $100,000 to go listen to some pretentious asshole go on and on about all the shit that they know. It's undemocratic. It's not fair. You're not building up networks. You're not building up contacts. And they're not actually teaching you. You forget about all that shit as soon as they quit talking. So, developing relationships and educating us, getting a true education, getting an education that we'll retain and that we could use to make money. That's what we need. And so college just doesn't do that. We would have been better off if they would have given that money directly to us. $100,000. Nobody asked me about $100,000. Let's $100,000. It's just ridiculous. Anyways, my point being is that it supplements our freedom. So I go get a job. Say I go to Taco Bell. I work for minimum wage, but my college is free. I'm actually doing better off making $7 an hour with a crap job and free college. I'm not in debt right now. I'm negative $100,000, so I'm not even at zero. Right? I'm starting below zero. I'm starting. It's like I'm not even at the starting line. I'm like 100,000 miles behind the starting line. And I would have got a better education if I would have been given that money directly. And so that's I believe that we could do a mixed socialist capitalist system. I think that you should have your bare essentials taken care of: food, water, clothing, housing, and that's all that's all you get. That's it. And I think that should be a guaranteed minimum income. And then I think there should be revenue generating programs. It should be called corporations. They should try to run some companies. And they could run their own gas station, run their own health insurance. They could run their own education. They could run their own. I mean, they basically run these things anyways, right? The road department, that does not make money. That we get taxed. Goes to Frankfurt. Frankfurt says, let's build a bunch of roads. That's not a good business. You're not making any money on that. And taxing growth, taxing people that's already established. I don't know if those are good ideas either. So anyways, that's a little bit about my economic talk there. Viva la revolution, occupy.